Ghostwire Tokyo is like Skyrim, with lots more ghosts and set in Tokyo, and not really like Skyrim at all. Despite that, I have been seeing a lot of comparisons to Skyrim and various Ubisoft games in the reviews. There may be little bits of truth to those statements, but it isn't entirely the case. If you haven't played it or heard about it, Ghostwire is basically an open-world ghost hunting game. You're one of the last surviving humans in Tokyo as all sorts of otherworldly creatures take over. Most of the things you encounter are out to kill you, but there are some friendly creatures too, like these shopkeeper cats. Your main goal is to save your sister, who's been captured by some sort of ghost king, but you end up spending most of your time tracking down and banishing evil spirits. Like most open world games, you can follow the storyline to unlock new areas and progress through the game, or split off to tackle side quests, collect things, or do a million other small tasks for minor rewards. Judging by the marketing materials featuring all manner of spooky ghosts and surreal visuals, you may be thinking that this is a scary game with some combat mechanics on top. But I'm here to tell you that it's more like the opposite. While it certainly fits the horror theme and even has some spooky bits here and there, it's definitely more of an action game than anything else. Think of it like Resident Evil 4. Still in the horror genre, but more focused on action-y thrills than scaring the player to death. Which makes sense when you realize it's made by Tango Gameworks, a Japanese studio founded by Shinji Mikami. Yep, the very same Shinji Mikami who directed Resident Evil 4. Their previous titles, The Evil Within 1 and 2, were also very similar to RE4. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the Evil Within games, and I think they're highly underrated. The first one was a bit too trippy and non-linear for some people, but the second one is just excellent all around. They're some of the best third-person horror titles in my opinion, right up there with the Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. So it makes perfect sense why I had an eye on Ghostwire Tokyo from the beginning. It's a very different type of game compared to the Evil Within, but you can see some similarities here and there. It's certainly not a perfect game, as you can tell by the variety of mixed reviews, but I did enjoy my time with it. Right off the bat, you'll probably notice that the game looks great. Huge props to the modelers, animators, tech artists, and everyone else that worked on the visual aspect of this game. Tokyo is crafted excellently, with striking scenes and small touches that make it feel both real and surreal at the same time. Walking through the rain-drenched streets and back alleys instantly transported me back to my time in Tokyo many years ago. I'm sure it feels even more oddly familiar for the Japanese players picking up the game. Regardless though, it nails the atmosphere of the once bustling heart of Tokyo wiped out in an instant. I'd say the closest I'd felt to experiencing a real-world place before this was New York City in The Division. That game had a lot of familiarities and small details, but this is on another level. But aside from the city itself, my number one praise for this game is how good the effects are. There are tons of mind-bending visual sequences and killer VFX coming at you non-stop. Many of these dreamlike sequences reminded me of Observer, another visual feast of a horror game. These parts were always cool to see, given that the team had freedom to do basically anything within the surreal setting. You never knew what you were going to experience next, and it was always something visually impressive. Plus, a lot of the other smaller effects both looked and felt great. Pulling the cores out of enemies, something you do quite a lot in this game, is incredibly stylish and satisfying to do. I can show you the visuals for this effect, which are cool on their own, but weaving it into the combat yourself feels great, which brings me to one of the most discussed parts of this game. Now, most reviews I've read mention the combat, ranging all across the board from loving it to downright hating it. I'm more middle of the road on this. Like I said before, the visual aspects of combat look great. You get a handful of abilities with different flavors to approach things how you want. You have 3 types of magic with normal and charge versions, and a couple talents to modify how they work. The magic behaves pretty similarly to the magic in Skyrim. Remember that whole bit about Skyrim at the start of this video? Well, I'd say that the comparison is most true for the magic in this game. Spam click spells to attack fast, or hold them down for charge versions. You can block, parry, and melee too, but those are pretty standard nowadays. The last move at your disposal is the ability to rip out cores from enemies, killing them instantly. Like I said before, this is always flashy, and it feels great when you mix it into the combat flow. You can pull one core or many at once, but it takes a little bit of time, leaving you vulnerable if used unwisely. Most enemies only have exposed cores when they reach low health, but you can occasionally get around this with things like sneak attacks or some talents. You also have a bow and a couple talismans that act like grenades of sorts with varied effects. The talents change things up a bit, but they're mostly just number bonuses in the end. More magic, faster casting, bigger explosions, and the like. I think combat is serviceable, but certainly not the strongest point of the game. A little more variety, be it more spells or just more ways to modify your existing spells, would spice things up a bit. Some extra talents for the bow would be cool to see too, because it basically only gets faster draw speed and more ammo. Although, the game isn't super long if you're just playing the story. There's enough meat to the combat and various upgrades to keep it fresh until the end. I mostly played the story with a little bit of exploration and side quests, and clocked in at about 10 hours by the time I was done. I think the length was just about right. It didn't overstay its welcome like a lot of modern games do. And for the completionists, there's obviously tons of open world content to waste countless hours on, if you're into that. Which is really where the Ubisoft game comparisons make sense. Love them or hate them, everyone knows what to expect when they pick up an Ubisoft open world game. Whether it's Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, Watch Dogs, or any of the other countless titles they produce, you pretty much know what the open world is going to be like. A big old map smattered with side quests, repeating objectives, and nearly endless collectibles. The concept that a player can never be more than 30 seconds from something to do. It's becoming a pretty stale formula by this point, but people still seem to enjoy them, so it's no wonder this formula is making its way into every new open world game. As a complete aside, this is one of the great parts about Elden Ring's open world. Instead of packing the map with markers every 10 feet, FromSoft pretty much leaves all exploration to the player. But that's got nothing to do with Ghostwire. The open world itself feels very Ubisoft, with stuff to do around every corner. It's up to you whether you like that or not. I can't tell you what to enjoy. But I can say that the side quests in this game aren't half bad. Sure, there's a handful where you just kill a group of enemies or explore an area, but there's also a lot of unique ones with real effort put in. Like this one where you hear about a mysterious train to nowhere, and you actually get to take it. It's not just some throwaway quest where you fight enemies in the subway, you actually do take a train to nowhere and experience a full miniature storyline within a couple minutes. A lot of the other side quests are based around famous yokai from Japanese folklore. Yokai means strange apparition and encompasses all types of weird mythological creatures. If you're familiar with Japanese folklore, you'll be pleasantly surprised to see quests featuring all manner of yokai. And if you aren't, you'll still be surprised at the wide variety of monsters and their quirky personalities. There's some popular ones like Kappas, Tengu, and Oni, but also some obscure entries like the Kasa Obake, which is literally just a goofy walking umbrella. So yeah, if you couldn't already tell, this game is very Japanese. Not just in the settings and themes, but all the folklore and mythology surrounding it. The default language is even set to Japanese with English subtitles. I decided to leave it on because it was the developer's intended experience, so I can't comment on how good the English VO is. The story itself had a couple twists and turns, but it was still mostly predictable. Serviceable, but nothing astounding. On the other hand, the mind-bending sequences you experience progressing through the story are certainly memorable. I really can't stress enough that the surreal visuals and excellent tech art are the best parts of this game, which is probably all I really need to say. Combat is flashy, but ultimately kind of plain. The open world looks and feels great, but it plays out like countless other AAA games. And the story is pretty middle of the road in my opinion. In the end, if you like the visuals and tons more mind-bending surreal sequences, I think you'll enjoy this one. If Japanese folklore or just exploring Tokyo is your thing, you'll find plenty of that. And if you want to support Tango to make more games like this and the Evil Within titles, that's also a great reason to give them some money. In the end, I enjoyed this game enough to recommend it, but I'd recommend the Evil Within a hell of a lot more. If you didn't really like the first Evil Within, I'd say give the second one a shot. It might completely change your mind on the series. Regardless, I think this studio has done some great work, and I'm still eagerly awaiting their next title. If you played Ghostwire, I'd love to hear your opinions on it, or if you just had some questions I didn't cover in this video, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you want to help support the channel, subscribing is always greatly appreciated. But for now, I've got lots of work to do, so I'll see you all in the next one.